The headline number looks fine. 2 million new car registrations in 2025, the first time Britain hit that figure since 2019. The industry celebrated. The SMMT put out a press release, and underneath every single one of those positive numbers is a story nobody in the industry wanted you to read. Because the people buying those 2 million cars are not the people you think they are. And the cost of what is happening in this market right now is falling on British private drivers in a way that has not been properly explained anywhere. I'm a mechanic. I've run a workshop for over 20 years. I've got nothing to sell you. Let's get into it. Start with the headline number and what is actually inside it. Of those 2 million registrations in 2025, private buyers, individual people like you buying a car for themselves, accounted for just 38.6% of the total. Fleet and business registrations made up the other 61.4%. The headline growth is being driven almost entirely by companies, not consumers. Private car sales fell in November 2025. They have been declining as a share of the market for 3 consecutive years. The recovery that the industry is celebrating is a fleet recovery. The private buyer is not coming back. The reason matters: affordability. The average new car price in Britain in 2026 is approximately £34,000. A decade ago, it was under £24,000. The monthly PCP payment on a typical £34,000 car over 4 years at current interest rates is somewhere between £450 and £550 per month. That is before insurance, which is up 47% over 3 years. Before fuel, before the road tax changes that landed on EV owners in April 2026. The private buyer has not disappeared because they do not want a car. They have disappeared because they cannot afford one. That distinction matters enormously, and the industry's 2 million unit celebration papers over it completely. The ZEV mandate distortion. Underneath the registration numbers is a pressure that is warping the entire UK car market. The zero-emission vehicle mandate requires manufacturers to sell 33% of their new cars as zero-emission in 2026. The penalty for missing that target is £15,000 pound non-compliant car sold outside their allowance. As of mid-2026, battery electric vehicles account for just 23.1% of new car registrations. Manufacturers are running 10 percentage points below the target. The fines for the full year, at current sales trajectories, would be catastrophic. So what do manufacturers do? They discount aggressively. They push EVs through fleet channels at prices that no private buyer ever sees. They cross-subsidize EV sales with profits from petrol models, and they pass the cost of mandate compliance into the prices of every other car they sell because they have to recover that cost somewhere. The ZEV mandate is not just an EV policy, it is a hidden tax on every car purchased in Britain in 2026, whether the buyer chose an electric car or not. The £7.5 billion scandal. The motor finance mis-selling case is the most significant legal development in British car retail in a generation. The FCA investigation into discretionary commission arrangements, where dealers were paid hidden commissions by finance companies to set higher interest rates without telling customers, covers an estimated 8 million finance agreements. The total liability across the industry has been estimated at up to £7.5 billion. The Supreme Court is expected to rule on this matter before the end of 2026. If the ruling goes against the lenders and dealers, the compensation claims that follow will reshape British car retail in ways that the industry is actively trying not to discuss publicly. Lloyds Banking Group, which owns Black Horse Motor Finance, has already set aside £1.2 billion in provisions. Close Brothers, another major motor finance lender, has paused new business entirely. If you took out a PCP or HP agreement between 2007 and 2021, it is worth checking whether you were one of the 8 million affected. The used car squeeze. The used car market tells a different story from the new car headline. Used car transactions dipped more than 2% in Q1 2026, ending 12 consecutive quarters of growth. That dip matters because the used car market is where most private British drivers actually buy their cars, and the forces squeezing it are structural. The COVID-era gap in new car production is now hitting the 5 to 7-year-old used car segment. Cars that should have been built in 2020 and 2021 were not, because factories closed. Those cars should be entering the used market now as fleet returns. They do not exist. The supply shortage in the specific age band most private buyers want, affordable, low mileage, 3 to 5 years old, is real and getting worse. When supply tightens, prices go up. Used car prices in Britain in 2026 are still running above pre-pandemic levels in most segments, despite falling from their 2022 peak. The private driver who cannot afford a new car and is looking for a decent used one is being squeezed from both sides simultaneously. The dealer network under pressure. The £7.5 billion scandal is not the only pressure on British car dealers. Agency model transitions, where manufacturers bypass dealers and sell direct to consumers, with dealers acting as agents rather than independent retailers, are compressing dealer margins on new cars to levels that make the traditional model unviable. Several major dealer groups have issued profit warnings. A number of smaller independents have closed. The DVSA 216,000 vehicle enforcement action, new MOT monitoring requirements, and the cost of training staff to handle modern EVs are adding operational costs at exactly the moment when margins are shrinking. A British car dealer closing is not a trivial event. It means warranty work has nowhere to be performed in the local area. It means the trade-in values for nearby used car owners collapse because there is no buyer. It means the next time your car needs a specialist, you are driving an hour further. The dealer network thinning is not a business story. It is a practical consequence that lands on every driver in the catchment area. What this means for you. The headline says the UK car market is fine. 2 million units, strongest February in 22 years, EVs growing. None of that changes what is actually happening to private British drivers. Affordability at an all-time low, insurance costs at record levels, road tax changes landing on EVs that were sold as tax-free, used car supply tightening, finance agreements that may have overcharged you by thousands, dealers closing, enforcement ramping up. The market is not collapsing in the sense of no cars being sold. It is collapsing in the sense of becoming increasingly inaccessible, increasingly expensive, and increasingly rigged against the private buyer who just needs something reliable to get to work and back. That is the collapse nobody in the industry is naming, and now you know what is inside the number. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Is the cost of car ownership hitting you harder than it was 3 years ago? I read every one. You know what to do with that subscribe button. The EV depreciation trap. There is one more layer to the British car market collapse story that the industry is actively avoiding. The ZEV mandate has pushed approximately 470,000 electric cars onto British roads in 2025 alone. A significant proportion of those were sold to private buyers who were told, with varying degrees of accuracy, that EVs hold their value well. The data for 2026 tells a different story. Early Nissan Leafs, Renault Zoes and Vauxhall Corsa electrics are losing 70% of their value over 3 years. Even Tesla Model 3s, the gold standard of EV reliability, have dropped from 40,990 in 2021 to 12,000 to 15,000 on the used market in 2026 because Tesla's own price cuts on new cars dragged the used values down with them. The private buyer who was persuaded into an EV in 2022 or 2023 on a 4-year PCP is now approaching the end of that agreement and discovering that the guaranteed future value written into their finance contract no longer bears any relationship to what a dealer will actually give them for it. The gap between the GFV and the actual market value is called negative equity. And negative equity on a car means the driver owes more on their finance agreement than the car is worth. That driver cannot change cars without writing a cheque for the difference, typically between £3,000 and £8,000 on an EV bought at the top of the market. They are trapped, and the scale of that trap is only becoming clear now as the 2022 and 2023 PCP agreements start maturing. The £7.5 billion finance mis-selling scandal is the headline legal story. The EV depreciation trap is the quiet financial story running underneath it, and it will generate its own wave of consequences through 2026 and 2027. The road ahead. None of what I have just described is unfixable. The ZEV mandate has flexibility mechanisms being debated in Parliament. The finance scandal will eventually be resolved by the Supreme Court ruling. Used car supply will normalise over time as the COVID-era gap fills. Insurance costs, while high, tend to correct when the claims data stabilises. What does not correct automatically is the private buyer being priced out of the new car market. That is a structural shift, the product of a decade of rising prices, rising interest rates, and rising insurance costs converging at the same time as the mandate is pushing up the cost of compliance. The industry needs the private buyer to come back. It is not doing enough to make that possible. And until it does, the headline number of 2 million registrations will continue to hide a market that is working for fleets, manufacturers, and finance companies, and increasingly not working for the ordinary British driver who just needs a car. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Is the cost of car ownership hitting you harder than it was 3 years ago? I read every one. You know what to do with that subscribe button.